I am 73 years old. I taught third grade at Oak Street Elementary in Brattleboro, Vermont for 34 years. I taught hundreds of children to read, to write, to check their work twice before turning it in. I spent my whole career telling my students to always read every word before signing their name to a paper. And that is exactly what I did when I co-signed the lease for my daughter in 2011. I read it. I reread it. I asked questions. I took notes. I even called the property management company a second time to ask them to explain two clauses I did not understand, and I still lost my house. My name is Ruth Patterson, and I came here because I know there are many people who think what happened to me cannot happen to them, because they read. That is what I thought too. I was born in 1953, in a small town in central Vermont. My father was a country doctor. My mother taught piano. I grew up surrounded by books, sheet music, and people who valued precision. By the time I was 8, I corrected my cousin's homework. I went to the University of Vermont. I was hired at Oak Street Elementary at 23 years old. I stayed there 34 years, almost all of it teaching third grade. I met Robert, my husband, at a faculty mixer for the Brattleboro School District in 1978. He taught American history at the high school. We were married in 1980. We had 37 years together until he passed away in 2017. We bought our house in 1985. It was a small cape on a quiet street, white clapboards, a stone walk Robert had laid himself. We paid it off over 23 years. 23 years of careful budgeting. We were not the kind of people who skipped a mortgage payment. In 1988, our daughter Sarah was born, our only one. We had wanted more, but it did not happen. Sarah was the center of everything. I watched that girl grow up in that house. I watched her learn to read in the living room, on the rug, in front of the wood stove. I taught her myself before she ever started school. I watched her graduate from high school with high honors. I watched her go off to Wellesley and then to Boston for graduate school in public health. It was October of 2011 when Sarah called me. She was 23. She had finished her master's. She had a job at a nonprofit in Cambridge, and she was looking for her own apartment. It was a one-bedroom in Allston, in Boston, $1,800 a month. Tight for a young woman just starting out, but she could make it work. She said it. "Mom, the leasing office wants a cosigner. They only accept cosigners who own a paid-off home in the United States." I said yes right away. Robert, too. But because I had never once in my life signed something I had not read, I told Sarah I needed the lease sent to me before the signing. I wanted to read it at home, in Brattleboro. Sarah was a little surprised. She said it could be done, but it would slow things down a few days. I said that was fine. The lease arrived in the mail 2 days later. I put it on the dining room table. I got out my blue pen, my reading glasses, and a notebook, and I read, page by page. It was a standard rental lease, 17 pages, a clause about move-in inspection, a clause about the security deposit, a clause about utilities, a clause about tenant obligations, a clause about landlord obligations, and then, on page 9, under the heading Guarantee Agreement, there was a paragraph that said the guarantor was bound for the duration of the tenancy, including any extensions, renewals, or modifications, and that the guarantee could only be terminated by written notice, with a notice period equal to the original lease term. I read that paragraph 3 times, Robert too. We talked about it for a long time, sitting at the kitchen table that evening, with mugs of tea and the lease open between us. Robert was a history teacher. He had a habit of looking for the consequences of language. He read it slowly. He underlined the word continuing. He underlined the word renewals. He looked up at me and he said, "This clause is doing a lot of work." We understood that in theory the guarantee could last well beyond the 12 months of the original lease, but we also understood that you could terminate it by writing a letter. That termination option reassured us. It seemed reasonable. It seemed fair. I wrote 3 questions in my notebook. First, how does this automatic renewal work exactly? Second, if Sarah renews her lease, do we have to sign a new guarantee? Third, If her rent goes up, does that change our obligation? I did not want to sign without answers to those three questions. I called the property management office in Boston. Sarah was a little embarrassed. She said no parent ever called like that. I said I was a teacher and I had to. I scheduled a phone meeting for that Friday. A woman named Mrs. Whitman called me at exactly the time we had agreed. She had a friendly, professional tone. She apologized that we could not meet in person. I had my notebook open in front of me, my pen ready, my three questions in order. I told her at the start of the call that I was a third-grade teacher and that I needed to take notes and ask follow-up questions. She laughed kindly and said, of course, that she wished more co-signers were as careful as I was being. For the first question, she explained that automatic renewal kicks in at the end of the lease term unless either party gives notice. She said the renewal is for another 12 months at a time. She said the guarantee stays in place during these renewals, but, and I am quoting my notes word for word, she said, Mrs. Patterson, this is a formality. You can terminate the guarantee at any time by simply sending a letter. It is very straightforward. For the second question, she said, no, you do not need to sign a new guarantee for each renewal because the original guarantee continues automatically. For the third question, she said that if rent went up by a normal annual amount, the guarantee stayed in effect. If it went up by a large amount, it would be revisited. Robert and I felt reassured. We signed 2 weeks later when we drove down to Boston for the formal signing. But what Mrs. Whitman did not tell me that day, and what was exactly what was going to cost us our house 13 years later, was this. The simple letter termination in the middle of an active tenancy is legally complicated. Case law in Massachusetts and in most states treats the guarantor as remaining bound through the end of the current term, plus all rent already in arrears, plus any rent that becomes due during the notice period. What she sold me as a simple formality was, in practice, a near useless exit once the tenant fell behind. And more importantly, she did not tell me that the notice period depended on the exact wording of the lease. In the lease in front of me, the termination letter required a notice period equal to the original term, which was 12 months, during which I remained on the hook with no suspension. I signed without understanding any of that. Robert, too. And we signed precisely because we had taken the time to read and to ask questions. That is the trap I want to talk about today. It is the very feeling of having been careful that kept me from being more suspicious. The years went by. Sarah stayed in Alston. She was promoted at the nonprofit. She moved up. She got engaged in 2017 to a man named Aaron, who was a software engineer. They got married in 2018 and bought a small condo together in Cambridge. But Sarah kept the apartment in Alston as a quiet workspace. She used it for her writing. She wrote 2 books in that apartment. Nobody ever spoke about the guarantee again. To me, the matter had been understood, negotiated, and secured. Robert and I had done what a responsible family does. We had read, asked questions, and signed, knowing what we were doing. In May of 2017, Robert had a heart attack. He was reading a history book in his recliner on a Sunday afternoon. He was 65. We had been married for 37 years. I went through the probate. I put the house in my name alone. Sarah came up from Boston with Aaron. Sarah and I cleared out Robert's study together. She kept his copy of Shelby Foote's Civil War set. She had grown up watching him read it. I retired from teaching at 66, 2 years after Robert passed. I started volunteering as a tutor at the public library on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I read 3 books a week. I traveled with my friend Catherine to visit gardens in upstate New York. Quieter, but a life. In November of 2022, Sarah called me on a Sunday evening and told me Aaron had asked for a divorce. She was sobbing on the phone. I had never heard her cry like that, not even at her father's funeral. I drove down to Cambridge that weekend. She was a wreck. She had not eaten in 3 days. The divorce got drawn out into early 2023. Aaron was kind in his way, but he had decided. Sarah took it harder than she had taken anything in her life, harder than the death of her father, harder than anything. What I did not know in that period was that Sarah had become severely depressed. She stopped working. She stopped paying things. She kept the writing apartment in Alston, but stopped paying that rent too. She did not tell me. She did not tell anyone. In April of 2023, I got the first letter, a Tuesday afternoon. I was correcting a stack of practice spelling tests for a student I tutored on the same dining room table where I had read the lease 12 years earlier. It was a certified letter from a Boston law firm, a demand letter. I owed $16,400 in my capacity as guarantor of the lease, signed on November 9, 2011. I read. I reread. I stood up. I went and got my binder of important documents, where I had kept everything related to that lease, the lease itself, my notes from the call with Mrs. Whitman, the renewal calendar I had tried to keep up with for the first few years before I forgot. I had been that organized. I read my notes again. I read Clause 9 again. I understood two things immediately. First, Sarah had not been paying that apartment for many months. Second, I had never released myself from the guarantee. Robert had not either. We had never sent the famous termination letter because we had never thought about it again. I called Sarah. She picked up. She was quiet on the line. I read her the letter. She broke down. She told me she was so sorry. She told me she had been spiraling since the divorce. She told me she had not opened her own mail in months. She told me she was going to fix it. I did not throw the letter away, but I believed her. I love my daughter, the way every mother loves her child. If you are listening to me, and especially if you think of yourself as a careful person, like I did, I have something to ask you. Tonight or tomorrow morning, go find any guarantee or co-signer agreement you signed for a child or a grandchild. Read the actual paragraph again, not the version in your memory, the actual words. If this video reaches you, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. I read all of them. Knowing that careful people are listening is what gives me the courage to keep telling this. I waited for Sarah to fix it. That is the most humiliating thing to admit. A teacher who spent her life telling people to always check, always verify, trusted her daughter and did not verify. In June, the second letter arrived. It was not from the law firm. It was from a Boston civil court. A summons, served by a process server who came to my front door on a Tuesday morning. The owner of the apartment, a man named Henry Perlman, had filed suit against Sarah, against me, and against Robert. Robert had been gone 6 years, but his name was on the summons. Because his name was on the lease, the debt was no longer $16,000, it was $28,000. In 2 months, it had grown by $12,000. Past due rent, more late fees, interest, additional attorney's fees, court costs. I went to see Mr. Sutherland, my Brattleboro attorney, who had handled Robert's estate. I brought him the lease, my notes from 12 years before, the demand letter, and the summons. He read carefully, slowly. He looked at my notes. He looked at me. He said this: "Mrs. Patterson, the guarantee runs for the duration of the tenancy, including renewals, exactly as the leasing office told you. The letter termination is technically possible, but it had to be sent before your daughter went into arrears, and there is a notice period of 12 months during which you remain bound. You never sent that letter. Therefore, legally, your guarantee has been running uninterrupted since 2011. I asked him what was going to happen. He said, "If your daughter does not pay and the situation suggests she cannot, the creditor will go after your assets. The house in Brattleboro, Mrs. Patterson." I left his office and I walked home. 40 minutes. I walked past houses I had known for 40 years, and I kept thinking, for 13 years I thought I was safe because I had read. I tried everything I could think of. I wrote a long, careful letter to Mr. Perlman, the owner. I explained my situation, my profession, my good faith. He wrote back politely. He said he was 81 years old and that he depended on that rent for his retirement. I tried to talk to Sarah. She was in and out of crisis through that whole spring and summer. She was getting therapy 3 times a week. She was on a stronger medication than before. She would call me late at night, sobbing, apologizing, telling me she would somehow find the money, telling me she would go back to work. But no money came. She was barely able to leave her apartment some weeks. I was watching my daughter come apart at 35 years old, and at the same time watching the foundation under my own life come apart, and I was trying to hold both at once. I sold my car. $11,000. Not enough. I sold my mother's pearl necklace, the one she had given me on my wedding day, the one I had been planning to leave to Sarah. $3,000 at an estate jeweler on Main Street. I cried in the car afterward in the parking lot with my hands on the steering wheel. It was the first time in my life I had sold something of my mother's. My mother had taught piano for 41 years to put me through college. Selling her pearls felt like erasing a chapter of where I came from. In December of 2023, Sarah was hospitalized for severe depression. She was inpatient for 6 weeks. I drove down to Boston twice to see her. She could barely speak. In August of 2024, the judgment came down. The house in Brattleboro was attached. I filed everything I could. I argued my age, my residence, my widowhood, my written evidence of good faith with my notes from 12 years before. The judge denied. He said none of it had any legal effect on the guarantee, and that the homestead exemption in Vermont, under a residential lease guarantee, was limited and did not protect a house of this value. I had been 71 years old. I had read. I had asked questions. I had dated notes, and the law said none of it counted. Mr. Sutherland filed an appeal. The appellate court affirmed. He told me an appeal to the state Supreme Court would take years and money I did not have. I told him to stop. In March of 2025, the auction was scheduled. I went. I needed to see. It was at the Windham County Courthouse. Maybe 15 investors. I was the only older woman. The auctioneer announced, Cape Cod single-family residence in Brattleboro, 1,140 square feet, opening bid $110,000. 6 minutes. The house, which had been appraised at $240,000, sold for $152,000 to a real estate investor who wanted to rent it out. After the debt, the interest, the fees, and the auctioneer's commission, what was left for me was $31,000. 40 years of living there, $31,000. I had 60 days to vacate. It was during those 60 days that something occurred to me that had not hit me before. My whole career I had told my students that reading would protect them, that the one who reads understands, that the one who understands does not get taken. And here I was. I had read. I had understood what they wanted me to understand, and I had still been taken. Because the leasing company and the legal system around it was not designed for me to understand everything. It was designed for me to understand just enough to sign. I live now in a small one-bedroom apartment in downtown Brattleboro on the second floor of a converted house. $670 a month. The $31,000 from the sale is in a savings account at the credit union, the same credit union where Robert and I opened our first joint account in 1980. Together with my Vermont teacher's pension, I have about 2.5 years of comfort before I have to make harder choices about where I live and how I live. I do not have my garden. I do not have my study. I do not have my bookshelves, the ones Robert built into the wall of the upstairs bedroom in 1989, the ones I always thought would outlive me. I had to give away most of my books because this apartment is too small to hold them. I gave them to the public library where I tutored. They put a small plaque on the donation shelf with my name. I kept Robert's Shelby Foote set, the 3 volumes of the Civil War. Sarah told me to. She said her father would have wanted me to keep those. I have not seen Sarah in 7 months. She is in a halfway program in Western Massachusetts. She is improving. She wrote me a letter 3 months ago. She apologized. I wrote her back 1 sentence. Sarah, I am all right. Come home when you can. I do not hate my daughter. That is the hardest part to explain to anyone listening. I do not hate her. She was sick. Mental illness is not a choice. She is paying for it, in her own way, in that halfway program in Western Massachusetts, doing the slow work of putting her life back together. But I have to say what I think. For 13 years I believed reading had protected me. I would like to be wrong. I am not wrong. Reading was not enough. If you have stayed with me until now, I am asking you for one thing. If you have signed a guarantee for a child or a grandchild, do not wait. Find the lease tonight. Read the guarantee paragraph, the term, the release. Write down the questions you have. And then, this is the lesson I want to leave you with. Do not ask the leasing office. Pay an independent attorney for 30 minutes of consultation. It will cost you maybe $200. You heard what my trust in a leasing office cost me. And if anyone in your family asks you to co-sign anything new, today, do not say yes the same day. Take it home, read it, have an attorney look at it. $200 can save you a house. I am not here for pity. I am here because I know there are people listening who think the way I used to think. That reading is enough. Don't sign what I signed. Thank you for staying with me. If this has reached you, please send the video to someone around my age who maybe read a contract a long time ago and feels safe. You may give that person the most important gift of their life. I am Ruth Patterson. I was a teacher. I read my contract in 2011, and I still lost my house. May what I said here help someone. That is what I came for.